Mexico is one of the most genetically diverse countries on Earth. But how did this diversity come to be? The answer is hidden in the DNA of millions of Mexicans today. A genetic code shaped by ancient civilizations, foreign invasions, and migrations that span continents. It's a story of survival, adaptation, and unexpected connections that few people truly understand. If you think Mexican ancestry is simple, you're in for a surprise. Mexico's history is written in its people, and their DNA tells a tale stretching back thousands of years. Long before Europeans set foot in the Americas, indigenous civilizations thrived across Mexico, from the towering pyramids of the Maya to the vast empire of the Aztecs. But these weren't just one people. DNA evidence shows that Mexico's indigenous groups are genetically distinct from one another, as different as Europeans are from East Asians. The Tarahumara of the North, famous for their endurance running, carry genes that allow them to run for hours without fatigue. Meanwhile, the Maya in the South have a genetic profile linked to some of the oldest civilizations in Mesoamerica. The Seri, an isolated group along the Gulf of California, are so genetically unique that they barely resemble other indigenous Mexicans. These groups have been evolving separately for over 10,000 years, creating a genetic landscape that is anything but uniform. But everything changed in the early 1500s when Spanish conquistadors arrived. With them came a new wave of genetic influence that would forever alter Mexico's DNA. The Spanish colonization wasn't just a clash of cultures. It was a complete reshaping of the population. Unlike in some other parts of the world, where colonization led to the replacement of native populations, Mexico experienced something different: the creation of a mixed ancestry people known as mestizos. Today, the majority of Mexicans have both indigenous and European DNA, but the mix isn't equal across the country. In the North, European ancestry is more dominant, while in the South, indigenous heritage remains strong. The way this mixing happened also left a unique genetic signature. Y chromosome studies show that most Mexican men have European paternal ancestry, while mitochondrial DNA, which is passed down from mothers, is overwhelmingly indigenous. This means that, historically, Spanish men had children with indigenous women, leaving a clear genetic marker of colonial history in the DNA of modern Mexicans. Yet the story doesn't end there. Hidden within Mexico's DNA are traces of unexpected migrations. African ancestry, though less talked about, is present in nearly every state. It originates from the transatlantic slave trade, when thousands of Africans were brought to Mexico by Spanish colonists. In places like Veracruz and Guerrero, Afro-Mexican communities still preserve their unique heritage. Yet even Mexicans who don't identify as African often carry small traces of West African DNA. But the surprises don't stop there. Some Mexicans also have East Asian and even South Asian ancestry. Genetic studies reveal that up to 2.3% of some populations, particularly in Guerrero, carry DNA from Chinese and Filipino migrants who arrived during the Manila Galleon trade. Others have traces of South Asian ancestry, likely from laborers brought in by European powers during the colonial period. These small but significant genetic markers highlight Mexico's deep connection to global migrations, showing that its people are not just a blend of two ancestries, but a true genetic mosaic. For thousands of years, Mexico was home to powerful civilizations that built cities, created writing systems, and developed complex societies long before Europeans arrived. But what if I told you that their legacy isn't just in the pyramids they left behind? It's in the DNA of millions of Mexicans today. The genetic roots of Mexico run deep, shaped by diverse indigenous groups whose ancestry stretches back over 10,000 years. But what makes their DNA so unique? The answer lies in isolation, adaptation, and a history more complex than most people realize. Unlike a single homogeneous indigenous population, Mexico has over 60 distinct indigenous groups, each with its own genetic identity. These communities are not just culturally different. Their DNA tells a story of separation and survival. In northern Mexico, the Tarahumara and Pima remained relatively isolated, preserving genetic traits that help them endure extreme environments. Their DNA reveals adaptations for endurance and physical resilience, giving them an advantage in long-distance running and high-altitude survival. Moving south, the indigenous groups of central Mexico like the Nawa and Otomi, share genetic markers linked to ancient Mesoamerican civilizations. These markers connect them directly to the people who once lived in Teotihuacan and Tenochtitlan, some of the most advanced cities of their time. But the biggest genetic contrast appears in southern Mexico, where the Maya and Zapotec populations carry DNA that differs significantly from other indigenous groups. Studies show that some Mayan communities have genetic ties to ancient Mesoamerican populations dating back thousands of years. Their DNA also reveals strong genetic continuity, meaning that despite centuries of European colonization, their indigenous ancestry remains dominant. This persistence is a testament to their resilience and the strength of their cultural and genetic heritage. Meanwhile, smaller indigenous groups, like the Seri along the Gulf of California, are among the most genetically distinct people in Mexico. Their genetic isolation has preserved traits that set them apart from nearly every other population in the country, making them as genetically different from other Mexicans as Europeans are from East Asians. These deep genetic roots also influence modern health and physical traits. Some indigenous genetic markers are linked to a lower risk of certain diseases, while others contribute to higher susceptibility to conditions like type 2 diabetes. Scientists are still uncovering how ancient adaptations to food, climate, and environment continue to shape the health of modern Mexicans. But one thing is clear: Mexico's indigenous DNA is not a thing of the past. It lives on in millions of people today, influencing everything from physical characteristics to disease resistance. In the early 1500s, a single event changed the course of Mexican history forever: the arrival of the Spanish. What followed wasn't just the fall of the Aztec Empire, but the beginning of a massive genetic transformation. The DNA of modern Mexicans still carries the imprint of this conquest, revealing how Spanish colonization reshaped an entire population. But how exactly did this genetic shift happen? And why do Mexicans today have a unique blend of indigenous and European ancestry that differs from other Latin American countries? Before the Spanish arrived, Mexico was home to millions of indigenous people with deeply rooted genetic lineages. But within just a few generations, their genetic makeup was drastically altered. The Spanish brought not just soldiers and settlers, but also diseases that devastated indigenous populations. Smallpox, measles, and typhus wiped out nearly 90% of some communities, leading to a sharp population decline. This created a demographic imbalance where the surviving indigenous groups were suddenly outnumbered by a growing population of mixed ancestry individuals. As Spanish settlers married or had children with indigenous women, a new population emerged: mestizos, a genetic blend of two continents. But here's where it gets interesting. The genetic mixing between indigenous and European populations didn't happen evenly across Mexico. In northern states like Sonora and Chihuahua, Spanish influence was stronger, leading to a higher percentage of European DNA. In contrast, central and southern regions like Oaxaca and Chiapas retained more indigenous ancestry, with many communities remaining almost entirely Native American in genetic composition. This regional genetic divide can still be seen today, shaping not just physical traits, but also cultural identities across Mexico. One of the most striking genetic patterns left by the Spanish conquest is the difference between maternal and paternal ancestry. Studies show that while most Mexicans have indigenous mitochondrial DNA, passed down from mothers, their Y chromosomes, inherited from fathers, are predominantly European. This reflects the reality of Spanish colonization, where European men had children with indigenous women, while indigenous men had fewer surviving descendants due to war and disease. This gendered pattern of genetic mixing has created a lasting imprint on Mexican DNA, making it unique compared to many other mixed heritage populations. The Spanish also introduced genes from other parts of the world through migration and trade. Sephardic Jewish and North African ancestry entered the Mexican gene pool through Spanish settlers, many of whom carried hidden Jewish or Moorish lineage. These lesser-known genetic influences add another layer of complexity to Mexico's ancestry, blending diverse historical migrations into the nation's DNA. More than 500 years later, the genetic impact of Spanish colonization remains deeply embedded in Mexico's population. It explains why mestizos make up the majority of the country today, and why genetic ancestry varies so widely from region to region. The conquest didn't just rewrite Mexico's history. It permanently altered the very DNA of its people, creating one of the most diverse genetic landscapes in the world. When people think about Mexico's ancestry, they often focus on its indigenous and Spanish roots. But hidden within the DNA of millions of Mexicans is a lesser-known chapter, one that traces back to Africa. Though rarely discussed, African ancestry is present in nearly every region of Mexico, shaping not only the country's genetic landscape, but also its culture, traditions, and even physical traits. So how did this African influence become a part of Mexican DNA? And why is it often overlooked? The story begins during the colonial period when Spain controlled vast territories across the Americas. From the 1500s to the 1800s, enslaved Africans were brought to Mexico as forced laborers. Unlike North America, where African populations remained largely separate, in Mexico, there was widespread mixing between Africans, indigenous people, and Europeans. This genetic blending left a permanent mark on Mexico's population, though its presence varies across regions. Today, African ancestry in Mexico is generally small, often less than 5%, but in some areas like Veracruz and Guerrero, it is significantly higher. What's surprising is that African ancestry in Mexico isn't always visible. Many people who don't have African facial features or skin tone still carry genetic markers from West African populations. This is because over generations, African DNA mixed into the larger mestizo population, becoming a silent but significant part of Mexico's genetic identity. In some cases, people who take DNA tests expecting only European or indigenous ancestry are shocked to discover African roots they never knew existed. One of the most overlooked aspects of African influence in Mexico is its impact on health and genetics. Certain genes linked to African ancestry play a role in disease resistance, metabolism, and even athletic performance. Studies suggest that some Mexicans with African genetic markers have a higher resistance to malaria, a trait inherited from ancestors who lived in tropical regions of Africa. Other genetic traits, such as lactose intolerance, can also be traced back to African heritage. These hidden genetic influences are still being studied, revealing new insights into how Africa's legacy continues to shape the health of modern Mexicans. Despite its deep historical and genetic presence, Mexico's African ancestry was largely erased from official narratives for centuries. Unlike other countries in the Americas, where Afro-descendant populations were recognized as a distinct group, Mexico's African heritage was absorbed into the broader mestizo identity. It wasn't until recently that Afro-Mexican communities in states like Oaxaca and Guerrero gained official recognition. This delayed acknowledgement explains why. For many years, African ancestry was underreported and misunderstood in Mexican history. Yet, DNA research is now shedding light on this forgotten past, proving that Mexico's genetic identity is far more diverse than previously thought. The African connection in Mexican DNA is a powerful reminder that history isn't just written in books, it's encoded in the genes of millions of people. Whether visible or not, Africa's influence remains an undeniable part of what makes Mexico one of the most genetically unique countries in the world. When people think of Mexico's genetic ancestry, they usually focus on its indigenous, Spanish, and African roots. But what if I told you that some Mexicans carry DNA from a place thousands of miles away, Asia? It may sound surprising, but genetic studies confirm that many Mexicans have traces of East Asian and even South Asian ancestry. The question is, how did these unexpected genetic markers end up in Mexico's DNA? The answer lies in forgotten migrations, centuries-old trade routes, and global connections that few people know about. One of the earliest sources of Asian ancestry in Mexico dates back to the 16th century, during the era of the Manila galleon trade. For more than 250 years, Spanish ships traveled between the Philippines and Mexico, carrying goods, silver, and people. Many of these people were enslaved or indentured workers from China, the Philippines, and other parts of Southeast Asia. They were brought to Mexican ports like Acapulco and later integrated into the local population. Over generations, their DNA mixed with indigenous, European, and African ancestry, leaving behind a genetic footprint that can still be detected today. But East Asian influence didn't stop there. Later migrations in the 19th and 20th centuries brought more Chinese immigrants to northern Mexico, particularly to states like Sonora and Baja California. Some worked in agriculture, while others helped build railroads. Though many faced discrimination, they eventually assimilated into Mexican society, and their genetic legacy became part of the broader mestizo population. Today, genetic studies show that some regions, especially Guerrero, have up to 2.3% East Asian ancestry, the highest in the country. There's also a lesser-known connection to South Asia. During the colonial period, the Spanish Empire transported people from India to various parts of its territories, including Mexico. These individuals, often labeled as Chinos in historical records, were not always from China. Many were actually from India or other parts of Asia. Over time, their DNA mixed into the Mexican gene pool, and while the percentage of South Asian ancestry is small, it remains a hidden thread in Mexico's complex genetic tapestry. What makes these Asian genetic influences so fascinating is that they are often invisible. Unlike the more dominant indigenous or European ancestry, which can sometimes be seen in physical traits, Asian genetic markers in Mexico are more subtle. This means that many Mexicans who carry East or South Asian DNA may not even realize it unless they take a genetic test. Mexico's genetic history is a story of movement, migration, and unexpected connections. The traces of Asia in Mexican DNA serve as a reminder that history is never as simple as it seems. Even across oceans and centuries, people and their genes have found ways to intertwine, shaping the identity of a nation in ways that are still being uncovered today. Mexico is a country of striking contrasts, not just in its landscapes and cultures, but also in its DNA. The genetic makeup of a person from the north can be completely different from someone in the south. Even neighboring regions can have unique ancestral signatures, shaped by centuries of migration, conquest, and isolation. But what exactly causes these differences? And how do they affect the identity of people across the country? The northern states of Mexico, including Sonora, Chihuahua, and Nuevo Leon, have some of the highest levels of European ancestry in the country. This is no accident. During Spanish colonization, the northern regions were less populated by indigenous groups compared to central and southern Mexico. As a result, Spanish settlers established strongholds here, and their genetic influence remains dominant to this day. Many families in these regions trace their ancestry directly to Spain, and DNA studies confirm a higher percentage of European markers compared to the rest of Mexico. In some cases, communities in the north have genetic profiles closer to Iberians than to indigenous Mexicans. In contrast, central Mexico is the heart of mestizo identity, where indigenous and European ancestry are more evenly mixed. States like Mexico City, Jalisco, and Guanajuato reflect the historical blending of cultures that took place during the colonial period. The indigenous groups that lived in these areas, such as the Nahua and Otomi, were among the most heavily integrated into Spanish society. Today, genetic studies show that people from central Mexico typically have a near-balanced mix of indigenous and European ancestry, though this ratio varies between individuals. This region represents the fusion of the country's two dominant genetic influences, creating a mestizo majority that is neither fully indigenous nor fully European. Moving further south, the genetic story changes once again. Oaxaca, Chiapas, and Yucatan have some of the highest levels of indigenous ancestry in the country. Many people in these states descend almost entirely from pre-Columbian civilizations, with minimal European or African influence. The Zapotec, Mixtec, and Mayan populations in these regions have preserved their genetic heritage despite centuries of colonization. In some communities, DNA testing reveals nearly 100% indigenous ancestry, making them direct genetic descendants of the first peoples of Mesoamerica. Then, there are the coastal regions, particularly Veracruz and Guerrero, where African and Asian ancestry are more prominent. The port of Veracruz was a major entry point for enslaved Africans during the colonial period, and today, many families in the area still carry African genetic markers. Guerrero, on the other hand, has one of the highest percentages of East Asian ancestry in Mexico, a legacy of migration during the Manila galleon trade. These regions highlight the lesser-known but significant contributions of African and Asian populations to Mexico's genetic landscape. What makes Mexico's genetic diversity so fascinating is that it's not just shaped by historical events. It continues to evolve. Migration within the country has led to new genetic mixtures, with people from different regions intermarrying and creating even more complex ancestry patterns. DNA testing is now revealing just how diverse Mexican genetics really are, showing that even people from the same state can have vastly different ancestral backgrounds. The regional differences in Mexican DNA prove that there's no single genetic identity for the country. Instead, Mexico is a mosaic of ancestries, with each region carrying its own unique genetic signature. This diversity is what makes Mexican identity so rich and complex, an ongoing story written in the DNA of its people. Mexican DNA isn't just a record of ancestry. It also plays a crucial role in health, physical traits, and even disease susceptibility. The genetic diversity of Mexicans has shaped everything from metabolism to how the body responds to certain medications. But what if I told you that your DNA could determine how well you tolerate high altitudes, how likely you are to develop diabetes, or even how fast your body processes certain foods? The answers are hidden in the unique genetic makeup of Mexico's population. One of the most noticeable ways genetics influences Mexicans is through physical traits. The variation in skin tone, hair type, and facial features across the country isn't random. It reflects centuries of genetic mixing. Indigenous ancestry is associated with darker hair, shorter stature, and certain facial structures, while European genes contribute to lighter skin tones and taller height. But what's fascinating is that these traits don't always follow predictable patterns. Two siblings with the same parents can inherit completely different combinations of genetic markers, leading to striking differences in appearance even within the same family. This is why Mexico has such a broad spectrum of physical diversity. Beyond appearance, Mexican DNA also affects health in complex ways. Indigenous ancestry has been linked to unique adaptations, including resistance to certain infections and a metabolism optimized for survival in pre-modern conditions. However, this same genetic background may contribute to modern health challenges. Studies show that Mexicans with high indigenous ancestry have a greater risk of developing type 2 diabetes. The reason? Their ancestors evolved to store fat efficiently as an adaptation to food scarcity. But in today's world of processed foods and sedentary lifestyles, this once beneficial trait can lead to higher rates of obesity and metabolic disorders. Another key genetic factor is how the body processes oxygen. Indigenous groups from high-altitude regions, such as those from central and southern Mexico, have developed genetic adaptations that help them breathe more efficiently in low-oxygen environments. This is why some populations living in mountainous areas have better lung capacity and endurance compared to those from lower elevations. Scientists studying these adaptations hope to use this knowledge to develop better treatments for respiratory diseases and even improve athletic performance. Genetics also influences how Mexicans respond to certain medications. Some genetic markers found in indigenous populations can affect how the body metabolizes drugs, meaning that standard doses used in Western medicine may not always be effective. This has major implications for personalized medicine, as researchers work to develop treatments that take genetic background into account. For example, studies on cholesterol-lowering drugs have found that some Mexicans require different dosages due to genetic variations in liver enzymes. Understanding these differences could lead to more effective treatments for common conditions, like heart disease and high blood pressure. One of the most exciting developments in genetic research is the potential for using DNA to predict and prevent diseases before they even develop. The Mexican Biobank, a massive genetic study analyzing thousands of individuals across the country, is helping scientists identify patterns in genetic risk factors. By mapping out which regions have higher rates of certain conditions, researchers hope to improve public health strategies and create targeted treatments based on ancestry. The influence of DNA on health is a reminder that genetics isn't just about where we come from. It's also about how our bodies function every day. Mexico's diverse genetic heritage has created a population with unique strengths and vulnerabilities, shaping everything from physical traits to disease risk. As genetic research continues to advance, the ability to use this knowledge for better health care and disease prevention will only become more powerful. For centuries, Mexico's genetic identity has been shaped by history, migration, and colonization. But what if I told you that the future of Mexican DNA is just as fascinating as its past? Advances in genetics are opening doors to discoveries that could change medicine, ancestry research, and even our understanding of human evolution. The question is, what comes next for the study of Mexican genetics, and how will it impact the lives of millions? One of the biggest breakthroughs in recent years has been the creation of large-scale genetic databases, like the Mexican Biobank. This project is mapping the DNA of thousands of individuals from across the country, providing a detailed look at Mexico's genetic diversity. The goal isn't just to understand ancestry, it's to revolutionize healthcare. By identifying which genetic markers are linked to diseases, scientists can develop personalized treatments tailored to specific populations. For example, studies have already shown that certain genetic traits common in Mexicans can influence how they respond to medications. In the future, doctors may be able to prescribe treatments based on a person's genetic profile, reducing side effects and improving outcomes. Another area of research is the search for ancient genetic links. While we know that Mexico's indigenous groups have been in the region for thousands of years, scientists are still uncovering new details about their origins. Some recent studies suggest that certain Native American populations may have genetic ties to previously unknown prehistoric groups. These findings could reshape our understanding of how the first humans arrived in the Americas and how they adapted to different environments over time. Genetic testing is also becoming more accessible to the general public, allowing Mexicans to explore their ancestry in ways that were impossible just a few decades ago. DNA kits can now reveal detailed information about indigenous heritage, European connections, and even traces of African or Asian ancestry that might have been forgotten over generations. As more people participate in genetic research, the accuracy of these tests will continue to improve, offering even deeper insights into personal and national history. But with these advancements come ethical questions. Who owns genetic data, and how should it be used? Some indigenous communities have raised concerns about genetic studies being conducted without their consent. Others worry that genetic information could be misused by governments or corporations. As Mexico moves forward in the field of genetics, ensuring that research is conducted ethically and with full transparency will be crucial. Looking ahead, the study of Mexican DNA has the potential to unlock new medical treatments, reveal hidden chapters of history, and connect people to their ancestral roots in ways never before imagined. With ongoing research, Mexico is not just uncovering its past, it's shaping the future of genetic science. The story of Mexican DNA is far from over, and what we learn next could change everything.